As Foster argues in Chapter 17 that sex is really about power, Shotgun Calypso uses this idea to trace Calypso's shift from a child who only watches sex shape her mother's life to a girl whose own body becomes a site of symbolic sexual violation. Writing Shotgun once represents her small claim to childhood power, but after Lonnie crosses her boundaries, she retreats to the backseat, signaling the loss of that innocence. Through Foster's lens, the story shows how sex first affects Calypso indirectly through her mother, then directly through Lonnie's violation, and finally resurfaces as trauma in her adolescence, marking the true end of her girlhood. And so, um, I want to start by introducing the three main people of our story and our protagonist. To understand the story better, we need to begin with the three kind of central characters. So, Calypso is the oldest daughter, and she's deeply shaped by what she sees, um, and what she's told by her mother. Um, and then we have Cleo, who's the younger sister, and then we have their mother. Um, an important thing about Calypso is her name. She names her Calypso after the goddess in the Odyssey who traps men, which is like a familiar story I'm sure we've all read. And she even says, um, why wouldn't she want a goddess that men feared for her daughter? My birthright was women who trapped love and took it by force, even when men cried, even when they couldn't afford to stay one more minute, they stayed 8 more years. So that's a nod to the Odyssey. And that got me curious about Cleo, so Calypso and Cleo, and the way Cleo was spelled. And so I went and looked it up in Google, and I'm hoping I can show you guys real quick so that I can show where I got this information from. And so here I have that Cleo is the goddess of history. Um, she's the muse of history. She's one of the muses. And so that comes into play. The muse of history kind of signals her role. It almost like a subtle foreshadowing towards an important scene later on in the story. The muse of history. And so we have Ma, we have Calypso, and the subtle foreshadowing, or not so subtle foreshadowing of her name, and the meaning of her name, and then we have Cleo. And then before anything, I want to kind of establish something here. Calypso is Shotgun Calypso, much like the title. So she is Shotgun Calypso, as in she rides shotgun. She's in the front seat, as her rightful place as the oldest, and it's a fun place for her. She gets to her mom lets her put her feet on the dash if she doesn't scratch the glass. It's fun. Um, her sister Cleo fights her for it, but Calypso only gives it up to her for Cleo's birthday, and she has to like remind her of that. So a lot of these memories that she has, a lot of these anecdotes take place in that car. And it's kind of a her riding shotgun as these things happen. It's and she sees things that are kind of inappropriate and risky. She still sees it from this childhood lens, and she listens to what her mom tells her, and she perceives it through this childhood lens. And it's a place where she feels physically closer to her mother as she's driving. She feels important. Um, and this will matter later in the story. Before we get to like the real turning point of this story, um, we learn a lot from these anecdotes that Calypso tells us that she remembers, and her observations of her mother. Um, Shema is very male-centered, and she teaches the girls early on that about the world works, or the way she sees it. Um, for example, we learn in this little anecdote about her name, we learn how she almost got with one of the bass player from Boys to Men with Michael. Um, and she could have been Michelle instead of Calypso. And she talks about her flirtatious times, um, talks about men. And then she has a man that she uses the word trick. That's her trick, is the man that she's kind of using or exploiting, and who's using her equally for her body and his pleasure, which is Lonnie. And it we learn about Lonnie right here. Um, and she uses that. Um, Even though Ma said he was a trick, like all the men she courted, she used some restraint. So she tried not to hurt him. Um, they spent a lot of time together, and the girls did not like Lonnie. Um, she her lifestyle and the way she talks about men, right here, um, that we knew Lonnie wasn't forever. We all knew that, but I think she loved him in a way you can love a rich married man who pays your rent when you're short. So we see that the girls notice this transactional relationship, and their mother often contradicts herself. Um, and they get to experience so many of these adult moments with mom because she's has this fear of them dying separately if they're not together. So we went wherever she went, they say. Um, so they learn to sum up a lot of this anecdote. They learn a lot from their mother, specifically Calypso, who's paying attention and absorbing. For example, they have Ma tells them like men are disgusting, and they ask even Mr. Lonnie, and they're like, oh, he's a man, isn't he? In this moment, they she tells him a lot of things. She talks about the fantasies of other men. She hears about Ma even talks about her whole days with her friends. She's a woman who she talks about how she has this kind of vulgar line about how, Calypso might as well be a lesbo because, sex with men um is so one-sided. Um and then yeah. Um that like talking about sex, you're very directed. It seemed like from what Ma said, it was never something you got, more something you gave, and always felt like taking back as soon as you handed it over. Because these boys out here, she would say, wouldn't ever really know what they were doing. So I bother with it. Just be a lesbo. But half the battle is won. That's a lot of the things that she would talk to them about. And so there's this version of Ma with a Man that the girls get to experience, and they have a lot of these car anecdotes and scenarios that they talk about where Calypso's riding shotgun and she gets to experience it. There's Ma without a man attached to her, a version that they like that felt more playful and girlhood like. And then there's the version of Ma that's with a man that kicks Calypso out of the front seats, especially when they went to go get um Lonnie. And there's this inappropriateness. The girls overhear their mother have sex often to the point that they can hear when she's almost done, what she's doing. They see men come and go. They're left unsupervised while Matt is with these men. And each of these moments kind of teach Calypso that intimacy is kind of chaotic, disruptive, and unsafe. And they learn about, as we get into the story, we learn about the different men about in Ma's life and therefore in the girls' life. Oh, an important piece that I'm trying to scroll through. There's a lot of pages here, and I wrote so much, and I want to get through all of the basis of this sexual exposure with Ma before we get to the real transition here. Is another situation where they're in the car, and there's a truck driver beside the girls, and he's the truck driver's driving a little bit wild, and they're having a little bit of this road rage moment. And so um, anyway, the man does this gesture, and it's the first sexual gesture that's directed towards the girl. They've had a lot of this sexual exposure due to their mom, but it's the first time that there's this sexual attention is directed at them. And so he makes this vulgar gesture when he has his like fingers in a V shape, puts it up to his mouth, and he wiggles his tongue in between. And that's kind of when they ask like, "What is that?" And their mom is like, "It's disgusting. That's what it is. All men are disgusting." And um, they the about Lonnie and the girls do not like Lonnie. He takes Calypso out of that spot in the front of the chair of the car, out of the shotgun. He's married. He lives in this rich neighborhood. He's a white man. They're black girls. The way he he dysregulates them, changes their their outlook and their life. The Ma changes around them, and then they recall her previous man, Charlie. I miss her old guy, her old guy, Charlie. He was fun. He didn't have all the rules that Lonnie came with. And then we kind of see all the things. We can't spend the night at his house because he's married to Miss Vanessa. He couldn't spend more than $500 because he had a joint account with his wife. They had some arrangement there. He had to vacuum after they were there to kind of erase their presence. Where with Charlie, he could be with them whenever he wanted. And it was very child-centered, amusement parks, knock-knock jokes. And he used to make Calypso laugh and he laughed at her jokes. And they had a million reasons to dislike Lonnie and his home. And this comparison of what life was like with Charlie and what could have looked like versus Lonnie, who was loud, he's unpredictable, his presence is disrupting. There are moments of girlhood that the girls enjoy. Miss Denise's house is like a symbol of that girlhood. They can be children, they're fed, they loved her butter beans, they could play with her son and run. Um, they have moments of girlhood. Um, and then we move to this area, this part of the story where they're at Lonnie's house for once. The wife is gone, or for once they're at Lonnie's house, the wife is gone. And then they do something here. So Ma and Lonnie go retreat to the room, and the girls know that they're busy doing whatever they're doing, and they raid the bathroom. And it says here, I think Ma said to grab her some tampons. So this is something that they do while Ma and Lonnie are in the bedroom, and it seems like it's something they do often and that their mom obviously approves of. It's interesting because it also shows scarcity here. They're grabbing essentials. They're not stealing jewelry or anything like that. They're grabbing tampons, the fancy toilet paper that smells like lavender. They raid this bathroom and they're playing, and it's another kind of symbol of how the girls know what her mom is doing, and this shows how like this adult life and intimacy that Ma experiences really leaves them to fend for themselves, and she even allows them to do these inappropriate, risky behavior. And then as the girls are in this bathroom and they get distracted and they're done doing what they're doing, they say this when they're done. They say this very ironic, almost um like this subtle foreshadowing. We return the bathroom to its former virgin state. the drawers and medicine cabinets closed, leaving no trace of the deflowering we've done. So just ironic that what's going on with Ma and Lonnie and what's to come. And so we get to one of these scenes that's just the epitome of girlhood. The girls are in Lonnie's bedroom. Ma and Lonnie are in a different room. And the bathroom that they were in was the suite in his bedroom. And they see Miss Vanessa's clothes and they see makeup. And they start dressing up and they're wearing makeup and it's smudged and it's silly and they're dressing up. It's one of the last moments of pure girlhood. They play with lipstick, they enjoy being children. And then Lonnie catches them, tells the girls, no, no, don't worry. Um, don't be afraid because they think they're in trouble. And he gets down on his to the girls' level, and he gets so close to Calypso's face as he leaned down his face a few inches from mine. And then he says, "You little lady's having fun." And then they're like, "We'll take it off." And then he notices Calypso's lipstick that the girls were applying and playing with. He sucks his thumb and then he takes his wet thumb and rubs it on her bottom lip. And at this moment, Calypso's body reacts. And she recalls her mom teaching her and warning her that your body kind of gives you sign when something is wrong as a way to protect her. And the irony behind this is that it's their mom and her neglect and her male-centered view that puts her daughter in this position in the first place. And so she feels this violation in her body. And even though she knows and she recalls her mom teaching her that this is a sign that something's wrong, she couldn't even tell you what was wrong. She didn't know. And then Lonnie pressed his finger, his wet finger he had just licked and rubbed on her lip, probing for resistance. He's pushing it against her mouth and says, just open. And she doesn't know. She's a child. She just doesn't know what possessed her. It does. And he puts his thumb in her mouth and her lips just close around it. And during this time, there's a quote that echoes in her mind. Ma says, the best way to get a man's attention is to put something in your mouth. And then she has this dissociation where she has another um, flashback and she has this memory of a time where she heard mom and her friend Tanya talk about back to Michael, the bass player. And there's like a subtle moment where we hear Aunt Tanya talk about it and how stupid they were then. And she has a moment of regret. If only she would have went and gotten in the car that night, that she would have never met Leroy. She wouldn't work at the chicken factory. And there's a subtle and ambiguous that something happened to Tanya that she regrets and had she just gotten in that car that night. And Ma does not share that regret because she's like, I wouldn't have gotten these daughters that I have here. So that's what she thinks of this time where she recalls some kind of violation or something happening to Tanya and that regret. And that's where her mind goes to until she's interrupted again by Lonnie saying to purse her lips and she didn't. So he physically grabs her and has her purse her lips and like suck on his thumb. And then he pulls it out and it makes a noise. And there was a ring of purple on his thumb. And then he just says very nonchalant, this way it stays off your teeth. And that does something to her. That violates her. She dissociates. She's in this moment where she's feeling like something the alarms in her body were set off and she internalized. You can see how deeply she's internalized everything her mom has said and she knows something is wrong and she's stuck in that moment. And then he decides to tell them, well, I have a surprise for you girls and it's a trampoline in the backyard. And of course Ma doesn't know what happened and she just tells them like, this is so nice of him, tell them thank you. And at this point the girls are in the backyard right after that had happened and we get to this part in the trampoline. Um, we see, she says, I saw Ma sitting on Lonnie's lap. They leaned back in the lounge chair as she kissed his neck. His eyes were on us. And that, as a reader, as now we know what just happened, it changes. The gaze changes of that. And then the girls just bounce on the trampoline and they bounce while they bounce and they play. They bounce while they notice that Lonnie and Ma left once again. They bounce while they realize and pretend to realize like they don't see that the blinds are open in their room. The blinds were open and we bounced like we couldn't see inside. We bounced as the sun went down. So they can, there's Ma once again having sex. The girls are aware and they can see it as they're just bouncing on this trampoline. We bounce as we promised each other when the rapture happened. The last thing we would put our eyes on would be each other. They make this pact of sisterhood. And this is where Cleo's name comes in. We bounced while Cleo wiped a stray tear from my cheek. That act of her wiping her tear instead of being like, hey, what's wrong? She knew. She's the muse of history. She's watching. She understood and she holds a history of that moment. She knows, like, oh, this was inappropriate for my sister. Oh, this something happened here. It was that acknowledgement. And so she wipes that tear, like, I saw that. I see you. I'm here. And then that changes their dynamic. Once they leave, she lets Cleo ride shotgun and she sits in the back. And she's no longer shotgun Calypso. She's backseat Calypso. She gives that space to her little sister and she just sits in the back and she just thinks about it and she wonders if she's going to forget someday about him, about lipstick, about trampolines. And she did and for a while. And then we hear here right at the end that until 3 days ago, I mean, she's still recalling. Like she's no, the years passed. And then 3 days ago, something that happened 3 days ago is still in her mind that brings back that trauma. And it's she's 15 years old. And a boy that she kissed stuck his tongue in her past his lips, and she found it behind her teeth, and she felt violated yet again. So she this shift from her being in the front seat to the back is just this shift of what happened there. The trampoline is this loss, the physical representation of this loss of innocence, this retreat, this end of childhood, and how this violation didn't end in childhood but followed her into adolescence. And it's the way it shapes her understanding of intimacy. So in the end, Calypso's girlhood ends not in just one moment, but through a lifetime of exposures from her mother, from these men, from this risky behavior, from these inappropriate situations, and then Lonnie's violation just confirms everything she's learned about sex and power and danger.